Welcome back, guys. Today we're talking about CO2. We're going to try to stay on topic with it. This isn't going to be really a product evaluation, but I am going to show you products. We're going to talk about what CO2 is, ways to put CO2 in your tank, the way I do it. We're going to laugh at those, and then we're going to talk about my favorite one, and we're going to drink coffee. CO2 is pretty simple. It's one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms attached to each other through a covalent bond, whatever that means. Plants need it for photosynthesis. They do that when the light is on, so they need the carbon when the light is on. 4 different ways to put that carbon in the tank. Simply, CChem Excel, passive CO2, DIY injected CO2, and injected CO2. That's it. So if other people try to explain other stuff, again, they're rambling. So we're going to try to stick with these 4. Excel is a chemical. It says it is bioavailable carbon. I've added it to tanks, never had any luck. I don't even know what it's supposed to do. I've never seen it do much. I do know that it hurts jungle val. My guess is it hurts all val. So I've got a little bit of val in almost every tank, so I can't use Excel anyway. The next one is passive CO2. Passive CO2 is your mini CO2 kit, which is this one. The mini CO2 kit, people get super confused about. I'm going to go over a little more detail in a second, but they think it's injected CO2 and they try to inject it and it doesn't work. Then you have injected CO2 kits. This is the Hagen Fluval version, which is like this but upgraded but more expensive. A lot of people complain about this one. We're not going to do a product evaluation, but I'm going to show you the things that have happened to me using this mini bottle injected CO2, and you can decide for yourself if you want to try it. The next is DIY injected, which seems to be the most popular. Not necessarily the most popular, but the most popular for people that don't want to step up to injected with all of the problems it has. DIY injected is when you're mixing up your own ingredients to make a DIY kit. The DIY goes from building every little thing DIY to buying a kit on Amazon. I don't know where mine is. It's stupid because it's just 2 bottle caps and a fake regulator and check valve. That system, you buy the soda bottles, you mix your ingredients. 2 different ingredients. The ingredients are yeast and sugar, which lasts a shorter amount of time, is less reliable, and is messier. And then the other one is citric acid and baking soda. The baking soda is just to calm the mixture down. The water and the citric acid create the CO2. There's a couple different ways to do it. And then the last thing is injected. Injected is the steel tank. You got to fill it up somewhere. Use professional equipment. Your regulator's $200. It can last an extremely long period of time based on tank size and bottle size. Very reliable. And if you're a pro aquascaper, it's always going to be the 4th one. I mean, for your serious tanks. You might goof around with the other ones. So I'm going to go over all 4 of them, and then we're going to look at ours. If you have questions, you can put them down in the comments. There's going to be a lot of things about CO2, even though this is specific, that we're not going to cover. So first of all, we're not doing the Excel. I don't use it. I don't know what it does. I don't care. Passive CO2 is my favorite. We're going to show you the passive CO2, but basically, you take bottles or you steal parts out of the Fluval's passive CO2 kit. So this cheap one, this $25 one from Fluval that has this weird double barrel diffuser is passive. Passive means there's no injected CO2 at all. You're basically filling up a bottle and you're leaving it in the tank for as long a period of time as possible, which means diffusing slowly. So this is Fluval's version of it, and then I have my version of it, and then I'm going to walk around and show you. A lot of my tanks have both. So they have the double barrel diffusers in all the tanks, and then I walk around with the Fluval bottle. I actually buy them on Amazon for $3, but you can use the Fluval one. It's probably a little more reliable. And you use a needle valve rather than a regulator. So when you're talking about equipment for CO2, this is actually probably the most important part. When you're talking about equipment, you have the bottle, whether it's passive, whether it's manual, injected into a passive container, or whether it's injected, or whether it's steel tank professional injected. You have the bottle, you have a needle valve, which the only place you're going to see that is on the Hagen Mini passive kit. All that does is allow you to regulate the air coming out manually. Basically, you're filling it up like you're filling up a bike tire, and then you're shutting it off with your hand. The regulator, which comes with 3 and 4, DIY injected, you have a Hagen regulator, Fluval, which is the same thing by the way. The 4th one is the $200 regulator, which is really precise. You need tubing, you need a check valve so your water doesn't drain back out of your tank. You need a bubble counter, which gives you guidelines or what you're doing injecting that CO2 into the diffuser. So this is a diffuser that comes with the 45 and the 88 gallon Fluval pseudo mini injected CO2 kit. You get this little diffuser, supposedly it's pretty good. This is a ceramic piece right there. I use a C-Chem one. There's a bubble counting one where you can watch the bubbles go into the diffuser. I've never seen it work. I've tried. And then you have bubble counting, which is the one I actually have that I'm going to show you with the ceramic top. So basically the CO2 collects in these glass areas, and then the pressure of the CO2 squeezes through the ceramic piece and comes out. The ceramic makes those larger CO2 bubbles, those bubbles that want to stay a certain size, breaks them up into tiny bubbles. Those tiny bubbles create more surface area on each little tiny bubble to be able to be absorbed into the water column. So if you have a big bubble, you do have a bigger surface area than one little bubble, but when you have millions of little bubbles, that's how you maximize the surface area. So you need to know that going into the passive CO2 kit. I've kind of explained that. This is a larger passive bottle. When I show you them in the tank, you're going to see rocks in the bottom, and that's to hold this down. Otherwise, you would fill it with CO2 and it would go up to the top. You want it to stay at the bottom. You want it to stay in one place. And then I cut windows out of the plastic, and that allows the water to flow through and mingle with the CO2 that's in here. You're going to see this set up in almost every tank I have. For anyone that's watched that, kind of famous video of the guy in San Francisco with the 30, 50, however many year old fish store that has those 20-year-old tanks with tons of moss growth in them, he uses these big bottles without the windows. No idea why. He doesn't use rocks. He looks like he silicones these to the sides of the tank, of course upside down. Some of them have wider mouths, and he goes through daily with his manual CO2 with some kind of needle valve. He uses a big professional CO2 bottle from the 4th tier, but he uses a needle valve rather than a regulator, is my guess. He attaches tubing to it, and then he opens it up and he fills up each one of these upside down buckets in all of his tanks throughout his store. And that's how he creates a massive passive CO2 system. And his tanks are so healthy and so old and so full of the moss that they're well balanced, and they probably don't need that much CO2. And he's also not growing CO2 plants, which is a whole nother episode. Which plants can tolerate what kinds of CO2. So number 3 is the DIY, the homemade injected. That goes all the way from make your own bottles up to a fairly professional steel bottle with a fairly expensive $50, $70 regulator, and you mix it up. And those are not for yeast and sugar, which is the inferior way to do it. They're for citric acid and baking soda, because that is a more efficient mixture. When you have the professional bottle, which you can buy anywhere, they're $70 to $120 for the whole setup, and you get a lot of little parts with it, like the parts we just talked about. In theory, we don't have one set up. In theory, that's going to take the place of any of those and work pretty well. The problem is, and this is what I'll say about all CO2, if you can't get the things you need to maintain your CO2 and keep it going, you're not going to do it. So if you can't get yeast and sugar, which would be really weird, if you can't get citric acid and baking soda, which sounds really weird, but it's not. I can't get citric acid. I've tried. I'm going on 2 weeks without ever getting it because I bought the cheap kit, made my own bottles, cannot find the citric acid. Of course it's online. I haven't gotten anyone to send it to me yet. Maybe because everyone else is doing this. The 4th one, the injected the professional way, hell no. Am I going to look for a place that fills up my bottle? And I'll tell you why. Not that I can't find one, not that it's too expensive, which it probably is. It's that those places change. Dick's used to do it, now they don't. This cheap paintball store opened up in the country where I am right now. You know that's going to be out of business in a week. To me, even though that's a great system and it's a professional system, if you don't live in a city and you know exactly where you're getting your CO2 tank filled reliably, forget it. So that leaves you with passive and DIY. Passive is never going to get over 5 or 10 parts per million, and you want to be 20 to 30 parts per million. I'm also going to show you this CO2 monitor. This is the Fluval one. From what I've read, it's fine. They're all fine. They're all kind of relying on the same system. The liquid in the little glass container inside your tank turning a color. They give a little sticker showing the color. You don't need it. It's blue, green, or yellow. Blue's not enough. Green is perfect. Yellow's too much. Green is going to be between the 20 and 30 parts per million. So in passive, you're never going to get over probably 5. That's my guess. I'm not a scientist, but I did stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night. So now we're going to walk around and look at these 3 tanks, and I'm actually even going to fill up some of the bottles. But I'm also going to show you the health of the tank relative to the CO2 system. The system we just set up is a newer tank. It's not going to look good. Here we are in tank number 2. You like how I write the number on the tank? This is for keeping logs of all the tanks every day. That's going to be a whole nother episode. This is my favorite tank so far. It's probably the most well balanced. It's got 2 forms of passive CO2. And if you look at this tank, we do have Monte Carlo growing on the bottom. And Monte Carlo is really hard to do without CO2. We do have a new light on this tank. We had a pendant light that was pretty strong. This light is about the same strength, but better color. So that will be in the light episode. You can see there's tons of jungle valve kind of growing through the other plants in the back. That's why we can't use Excel. So here's the bottle of CO2 with the rocks in it, holding it down. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but we are worried with passive CO2 with water flow, and we want to watch that water flow. It's probably going like this for maximizing the water coming in contact with the CO2. So basically I have the fluval bottle. This is actually a generic bottle. I have the fluval needle valve from the mini kit, and then I have CO2 tubing. That's it. That's all this right here. I put the tubing in the bottle. I turn it on. It comes out. You don't need to be precise. It's like a fire hose. You fill it up to the top of the window. See the window of the thing? The rocks hold it down. If I fill it up too much, I've kind of got these rocks where they hold it down, but if I fill it up too much, see the way it's shaking? It's trying to float. So if that window was lower and I've put more in there, it would come to the top, or I'd have to put another rock in. In the back of the tank, there is one of those double barrel diffusers, but this one's actually different than the other ones. This is the ISTA kit, which is a CO2 can, not a bottle, not like this. It comes like this, and when it's gone, it's gone. Right? So every morning I just squeeze that into the double barrel type diffuser. This is actually a single barrel, but it's the same size. It's super convenient, but it's very passive. And when this bottle runs out, you're gonna have to get another bottle, or you're gonna have to fill up that diffuser back there with this, which isn't gonna hurt anything. You can do that. So if you have questions about this tank specifically, this is the 10 gallon. This is number 2. You can feel free to put that in comments and say, how did you do something that you see that I don't see? I could go over all these plants for you and say what they do with CO2. But again, that needs to be the plant episode. You can see Busalandra, you can see Nana Petite, and then you can see Reineke doing terrible. On the plant episode, I'm going to talk about Reineke because I don't get that. It looks bad in every tank. I can't wait to get to that episode and tell you which plants never grow, never do well, and piss me off. Okay, this is tank number 4. You can see number 4. And now what's interesting about this tank is you can look at the plants and they look a lot more scraggly than this tank. And if you look at the tops of them, when they don't have what they want, they have a tendency to grow smaller at the tops, and they usually grow greener rather than maybe the color we're trying to get out of them. You'll see a double barrel Hagen CO2 in here because I put it in yesterday. So it hasn't really affected this tank yet, but if you look at this tank, this is what it looks like with 0 CO2. And that was what we were doing as an experiment. This tank was always more scraggly than this one, which tells you exactly, well, not exactly, but it tells you what the passive CO2 is doing. The reason it's not exact is we might be doing something a little different. The lights are different. This is a strip light, really good color, 6500. This is a prime 16, which is a good light, but it's farther from the water surface. It's a deeper tank. This has some aqua soil mixed in here, which is doing some weird stuff to the tank. So other than those variables, the passive CO2 is giving a boost to a lot of these plants. These are very scraggly, so I finally got what I wanted out of the experiment, and I put a barrel in here. I'm going to start filling it up just to bring some of these tanks. I'll talk about these red root floaters late on another episode too, because I use these to tell me the health of the tank. So this is what it looks like with 0. A great plant, I don't want to talk too much about plants, for gauging this stuff is the red Mirio or the green Mirio. That's that bushy plant right there. What Mirio has a tendency to do is fall over, and it also turns a little brown. So the red Mirio is not dead, but it's kind of laying over and it's kind of brown, probably because it's not getting the CO2. The other ones are. The light should be fine for it, but there's a lot of Java fern in here sucking up the nutrients. Bushier plants like this usually can get more nutrients out of the water column than the soil, and they have a higher demand for that liquid nutrient. And I don't want to add too much liquid nutrient. For the past 3 months that these have been set up, this has not had CO2, and you can see these plants growing like crap. All right, so this is tank number 7. This is the newest tank that we have. I haven't even written 7 on it yet. This is a good example of trying to take a step up to injected CO2 but this is that really, really, really mini fluval injected CO2 kit. This is the 50 gram or the 45 gram. So this one's designed to be injected, and I'm going to show you every step of the injected, because the pro systems, even the DIYs, are going to operate on the same principle. You have the bottle, whether it's DIY ingredients or whether it's professionally filled CO2. The Fluval 45 is a disposable. That's what I like about it, actually, because I don't want to go try to get it filled up. This is a 45 gram. This is the Fluval regulator. So it's kind of a mini version of the regulator, and I think this is the weakest link in the Fluval system. Again, you make up your own mind if you want to deal with all these problems. With this cheaper regulator, it's harder to get a precise, steady bubble count. The bubble count changes. So as it changes, your CO2 coming out of your disc is going to change. It's going to set you off. That's the CO2 monitor. And this is another manual that I was using on this tank that I still use simultaneously. It's the double barrel mini Fluval with the tubing that comes out, designed to be hooked up to a tank that you just turn on and off with your hand. This one. But since I have multiple tanks, I have to walk around. So I just hook it up, fill it up. I'm actually going to show you right now. So I leave the tubing right there. Be careful, the suction cups with all Fluval products don't work. So if you pull on it at all, so if you watch that double barrel diffuser, as I open this valve, it'll see it kicked it out. It'll fill it up. And then as it fills up the bottom one, it pops and starts filling up the top one. And I find that if you put too much in there, the cheap suction cups give way. I've tried to fix the suction cups and put Eheim ones on there, and usually the stuff doesn't fit. So I'm getting that passive CO2. My guess is 5 parts per million at best. So now I'm adding to this tank, which does have some pretty good plants in it. No high demand plants on purpose, because I don't want to kill them. This tank's only 5 days old, so it does have diatom algae, and it does have aqua soil. So let's, in detail, talk about the injected, because it's the same system as a pro injected. It's the same principle. You've got the bottle, you've got the regulator, you've got the tubing. This is the bubble counter and the check valve. So this is the inline. These are the bubbles right there. You're supposed to count them. Good luck. It doesn't work. I'm guessing 2 to 3 per second. You can kind of see 1 Mississippi, 2 to 3 per second. And that should result in the minimum amount of CO2 in a tank this size. So if you look in there, that is not the Fluval one intended to go with this kit. That's the C-Chem bubble counting. But inside there, there's a CO2 at the top being filled by this that's pressurized. And then it's diffusing through the ceramic top. And you can see those tiny little bubbles. This is still blue, which means there's no real CO2 in here. It's probably around 10. So I could turn this up, but there's no reason to do that. Any CO2 boost helps. This has been a problem for me because one of the problems regulating the CO2 into the diffuser is any non-perfect seal at any of these points. And these 2 points are really cheap. This one's a little better. These are plastic. There is a little gasket in there. It doesn't work very well. You'll see moisture coming out of them. I'm tempted to put this in the water to see what happens if it bubbles out the top. But if this isn't sealed, it's inconsistent. It'll still make it through there, especially if I turn it up, but it's inconsistent. So that's it for tank number 7. I can't really show you the growth yet because it's 5 days old, but if we can get this to stabilize and leave it on here for even just 2 weeks, we can look at these plants, and I can tell you by those stem plants, there's Rotala and something else in the back that I forgot, Ludwigia. So will some of these microswords and dwarf sags. Those kinds of plants really tell you what's going on because they're just sensitive enough. Whereas the Anubias and the Nana Petite, those things are going to grow in anything. Okay, so now I'm going to summarize some of the most important elements. I don't know where my bottle went, but oh, I dropped it. I'm going to summarize the types, the Excel, which I don't use, the passive, which you can do yourself. You could buy these, but the problem with doing that is you're not going to get a needle valve. I've looked, I can never find a needle valve. I don't know if I'm doing it wrong or if there's no mini threaded needle valves. The needle valve's going to be threaded and you have to buy threaded extra cartridges. That needle valve that comes with the Fluval kit, I have seen some things that look like it, but they're $50. This kit's $25. So I'm going to get a free can of CO2. I'm going to get the holder, which is kind of useless, and I'm going to get the double barrel diffuser, which I like. So basically, you buy the mini kit, you take the needle valve and use that with all your You use this one if you want. You use the needle valve. You make these if you want. You just use their diffusers if you don't need too much, or if you have a lot of these laying around. Passive CO2 is basically just holding a bottle of CO2 in the tank, letting it mix with the oxygen, which it naturally will do at a fairly slow rate, and enriching the tank during the light period with some CO2, probably 5 parts per million. Then you have the DIY kit, which we don't have. I did finally get a setup, but I can't find citric acid. That's going to be here. And then you have the injected CO2. This is not a good example of it. This is the $50 45 gram Fluval one, which was the last thing I showed you, which is actually taking a bottle, using a mini regulator, injecting it through the bubble counter into the ceramic diffuser. And you can see it's kind of working. We'll see what the tank looks like in 2 weeks. But what this is intended to be is the injected bottle, which is the big bottle, whether it's 2 pounds, 5 pounds of weight of CO2 inside the metal bottle, a $200 regulator, and the rest of the similar components that allow you to do it. You will need a special kind of regulator, a dual stage, a manifold to break your CO2 up and use it for multiple tanks, which to me is another problem. You're not going to be doing it for 7. Even if I could break it up 7 ways, the tanks are all over the place. You'd have to have them all in one rack. So for me, the injected CO2 is not the answer. The DIY injected might work, but again, I would have 7 of them set up. That would be difficult. So the passive, in my opinion, is actually the best system. There's just some plants that don't like it. But you can see Monte Carlo is growing very slowly with a pretty nice solid light. It's the strip light, that's tank number 2. And 2 different versions of passive CO2 in the tank. One of the bottles, smaller than this one, half the size, and the barrel. So I would start with the passive. Nothing can explode, super easy to get. You can buy these mini ones everywhere. They can be anywhere from 50 cents to $2 per bottle. You can buy the paint gun, threaded 20 gram, and start from there. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Put your comments below if you have a CO2 question on this episode. Remember, we're going to do more specific stuff about plants and CO2, what plants like it. And then we're going to come back and show you some of the systems as they evolve over time. That's it. Thanks for watching.